chair for today. My preferred pronoun is he. Judging with me will be Greg Farquhar, he, Duncan Crowe, he, Lucinda David, she, Gigi Gill, she, Manos, he, and Fred Cowell, he. Before we begin the debate, could I get the speaking orders and preferred pronouns from the teams, please? Opening government.
Desi, she, and Kai, he.
Opening opposition.
Harry, he, and then Roy, he.
Closing government.
Kristen, she.
And Casper, he.
And closing opposition.
Radu, he, Ioana, she.
If there are no questions about the standing orders, I'd like to invite the Prime Minister to address the House and to speak for the motion that will stand in my name. Here.
Part of a minority which is not religious but ethnic, I'm very proud to stand here, and it's not easy, but I think I'll be able to understand, to explain to you and make you understand why it is important if you're a minority in a Western country in Europe, and especially a religious minority in a society that defines itself through secularism and upholds that as the absolute core of their identity. It is absolutely in your own interest on the short run, at the moment where we find ourselves, where we have huge resentments from the majority society towards Muslims, especially in Western Europe, why it is in your own very interest to follow this proposal that we suggest here. What I'm going to do for you, first of all, is outline the status quo and the problem that we see in the status quo right now. Second of all, I'm going to talk about the aims and what will actually happen if the leaders of minority religions start implementing that. And lastly, I'm going to talk about why it is in the very interest of the heads themselves and why the communities themselves, the individuals in those communities, will actually benefit on the short and also on the long run. We believe that these religious minorities are here to stay, and we think that is a good thing. But the problem that we see for these religious minorities is that they face huge problems under the status quo. The discussion, the debate, the perception, and the way that talks are led in the media and in society have become very superficial and very polemic, very aggressive, and very polarized. The things that are being discussed are, for instance, very superficial symbols. There is no real discussion and there is no real acceptance of the other side, and to listen to their actual, to what they actually want to achieve. So the assumption that this is based upon is that religion doesn't fit into our democracy. We have overcome this. We see this as a progress. We are proud about that in the Western world. The idea is that we are secular. They live their religion visibly. They put it in our face. They are not capable of accepting that this is a secular society where we keep our religion to ourselves, if we are religious at all, and not carry it outside and try to impose it on everyone else. We don't say this is correct, but we say for you as the minority community, you should rather be pragmatic and think in long terms, because in long terms you want to be accepted as Muslims, as German Muslims, as British Muslims, as French Muslims, and not just Muslims in Germany. They don't really belong here. Hopefully they will go away someday. This is the discussion right now, and we don't really have progress as long as the perception remains polarized, and these actors and these groups in society are not accepted as right now fitting in or ever being capable of fitting in. What we see right now, the majority sees the symbol, they don't see the person anymore. They're not ready to accept this is an actor that has viable interests, like for instance instance, maybe Islam lessons at normal schools, or Islam becoming a regular subject at university discussions we're having in Germany, because the discussion and the perception is so polarized over visible symbols. This is what the people are reduced to, and no one is ready to accept them as viable and valid actors in this society. They do not belong here, they're seen as not belonging here, and we think if we take this pragmatic stance, we can actually change that. Before I go on, opening please.
Do you believe that in a predominantly heterosexual society, homosexuals should avoid being homosexuals in public in order for society to accept them?
No, I don't. But the reason and the difference here is that in the West, we understand ourselves as being liberal and accepting different lifestyles. But we understand also ourselves to be secular, and this being the foundation of our society. This is why this motion is about religion and religious minorities, and not minorities in and of themselves in the Western world. You have to understand that this is at the core of the debate, and this is where the problem comes from. So your analogies just don't work here. So let's talk about what we think will happen. We think that what will happen is, yes, there will be a disappearance of visible symbols of Muslims, especially from public, from the public sphere. What will happen is that there is going to be probably a little bit of a silencing. They're not going to be recognized as maybe really existing in society, but we think that is something that at this point will be a positive thing, because what will happen is a period of peaceful coexistence. Yes, you will see that maybe this person is a Muslim because somehow, I don't know, maybe there are small symbols that are not that visible, or he tells you or she tells you, but it's not going to be the uppermost, most important visible first issue that the Muslim community is being confronted with. And we think peaceful coexistence is the most important first step at the status quo that we have right now, because we don't have this because of the polarization, because of the prejudices, and we think because we are the minority, as the religious minorities, it is in our interest to be pragmatic and not to be proud, because this is the problem. Let me talk about why we believe that it's in the interest of these heads that are supposed to actually say this to the congregation members. We think that by taking this pragmatic stance and achieving this possible coexistence, they can actually be more accepted into society. So when they then talk about being Muslims, it will not be linked to visible symbols like, for instance, the headscarf or prayer 5 days at work and so on and so forth. You have to understand that there is a power and that there is a mechanism of coexisting with someone that is different, and then starting to talk about their difference. This will be perceived differently than when the first thing they talk to you about as the majority is what they are different in. First of all, you accept them as co-citizens. Yes, maybe somehow he's a Muslim, that's never really an issue. We don't really talk about, I accept him as my colleague, I accept him as my friend, I accept him as my teacher, and so on and so forth. So you accept them as a person and as a group in your society first. So when they then start to talk about the issues that they care about, like for instance religious issues and things that they would like to implement in the society, you react differently, because this first step of acceptance has already happened. So this is a very strategic move that we would say the heads should take. It's a very pragmatic move. It's a very pragmatic move, but it's a very intelligent one, because you have to achieve this first step of being accepted first. We think they can still live their religion. It is not like they have to stop living their religion, because there is a difference between visible symbols and invisible or inner community symbols. Like for instance prayer. You can still go to your mosque. You can still fast on Ramadan, and all these things that you can do with your community that are different, and still you can do that and still live your religion and still feel like a proper Muslim that is doing the right thing. Only when you step outside, you don't do that. And that's why we think that's a very good thing. You have to understand that the problem we have right now in Western societies is that the discourse is dominated and Muslims are not accepted. The discussion is very superficial, and we need to achieve acceptance first, so we can accept the content that these groups bring to us or the governments, when then we start talking about what they want. Thank you very much.
I thank the Prime Minister for his speech, and now I invite the Leader of the Opposition to address the House. Here.
Is there a way to turn this off? 3 points. A, on why it is extremely hurtful to make someone be ashamed of his core identity and not allowed to publicly display it. Second, on the complexity of having conflicting identities in a modern reality and not being allowed and not allowing them to live together. And thirdly, on societal integration and how all that works. First of all, 5 points of rebuttal. First of all, on the characterization of like extreme Islam, specifically in France. We think the religious minorities are slightly more robust than that, right? We have Jews who are integrated quite successfully and quite publicly into society. We have Catholics in Germany, and we have Islam being accepted as quite a tolerant religion in many areas in Europe. Narrowing in on the very worst cases is those cases where this just won't work. I'll get to that later. Second of all, on the idea that you're just hiding the symbols. So first of all, no, you aren't. You are being told to not be displaying your religion. You're being told to not engage with the rest of the community as an Islamist, as a person, as who you are. Okay, you're hiding a part of your identity. It's not just about the thing you put on your head. Third of all, she tells herself that, look, we're a mostly accepting society. Well, obviously we aren't, right? And then she says that, look, we're accepting in everything but religion because we see ourselves as secular. Please no, we are not accepting of gender queries, for instance. Not today, definitely not a decade ago. And you know how that might be changing? It might be changing because these people are engaging with society, because they are publicly flinging their personality, saying who we are in public, getting to know people, not hiding in overt communities, running away. Okay, there is a problem. If there is a tension, it's about time we start engaging with people in a meaningful way. Running away to secluded societies is the wrong thing to do. Okay, so why this is extremely hurtful? So for a religious person, the religion is the very core of his identity, right? We see people killing themselves for religion throughout history. We see it as an absolute authority. We see it as a core identifier on a community level, on a personal level, on the basic way of how I look at life. Now, when you tell someone that your identity, that you, the person, the very core of what you identify yourself, is not good enough, right? You can't be French and Islam. You can't do this, okay? You're not good. Then that is a very serious burden to carry, right? In your win cases, in those cases of people who put their heads down and then later on start talking, they're walking around with the burden of feeling fundamentally unaccepted, of feeling fundamentally inferior to the general society, of feeling as inferior people. I think that has incredible backlash, but I think that just in and of itself, you have to resolve that issue. You have to resolve, how can you do that to a person? How can you tell a person that he can't do that?
Point of information.
Yeah, I'll take you at this point.
Yeah, sure. They can still be publicly religious. They can still have their religious practices. What we are just saying is that they should not use the standard symbols of their religion to emphasize that in public spaces.
So what you're saying is that they can still be publicly religious so long as it's not publicly, or they don't display publicly that they have their religious identity. Right, so I'm allowed to say, oh, I'm a Muslim, but I'm not allowed to say I'm a Muslim if it's a piece of clothing. We think that's absurd. Second of all, let's talk about the complexity of conflicting narratives, right? So growing up as, say, an Islam, a Muslim, yeah, I knew that word that was, a Muslim in France, I am going to have conflicting identities, right? I have a very core, strong identity that I'm Muslim. I also have a secular identity. I'm also part of society. I have friends. I go to school. I also have additional identities. Say I'm gay, or I'm straight, or I like the Beatles. But these two identities are very much conflicting. Now, what is happening here is you're taking a authority figure, right? A religious leader, an authority figure, who's telling you in no uncertain way that these identities are not resolvable. That you cannot be both one and the other. You cannot be both French and Muslim. Now, note that you're getting this in the context of being in a community which is all disenfranchised in the same way, right? So I get this message while I'm in mosque, okay, and everyone has the same message, and now we can collectively learn that we are not really part of France. What this brings it to a situation where it is likely that communities seclude, that it is likely that Muslims keep to themselves and do not engage with society, that they believe themselves as a separate part of society. Now we think that that context is extremely easily weaponized, right? First of all, because when you are not a part of society, it is very easy to be used against society. It's very easy to have legitimate grievances with society and to be as unaccepting as you are unaccepted. Second of all, please note that specifically with young persons who there is out there another narrative, a narrative of violence, a narrative of the IS recruiters throughout Europe who are telling the people, you can't be French and Muslim, you should walk around in pride. We think that for people who feel dejected and secluded from society, it is extremely easy to prey upon those feelings. When you're told that you can't identify as a Muslim in Europe, then perhaps it is time to go and found an Islamic State. We think that is extremely pernicious and extremely dangerous. We think that is a harm to our entire society. And finally, on societal integration. Look, societies accept religion, right? There are many religious people. Look at the United States. Look at Jews throughout the world. Look at the Jews in Israel. Look at most minorities. But in order to accept them, they need to learn who they are. They need to engage with them on a personal and public level. They need to conflict the world views. They need to engage with them in a meaningful manner and get accustomed to see what that means and how these identities can be resolved. Ladies and gentlemen, we are attacking the very core of who these people are. We do not think that is acceptable, and it has really bad consequences on our society.
I thank the leader of the opposition for his speech, and now to continue the case for the government bench, I'd like to call upon the Deputy Prime Minister to take the floor. Go ahead.
Being a Muslim in Germany is often not easy. Being a Jew in Germany is often not easy. Being a Catholic in Germany, by the way, is pretty easy because it's one of our majority religions. Being a Jew in Israel is rather easy. Being an Arabic person in Israel is way harder. This is why we say we should do this. Not just for the sake of our people, but as well for the sake of our religion and for the sake of the idea that we actually become part of the society. Most of the points actually clash with yours. I have an additional point which is marked Eastern Europe. So let me firstly talk about his idea. It's being very hurtful. He misunderstands the idea of symbols. Symbols are the idea what you make out of it. If my religious leader, or if I as a religious leader tell you this symbol is for your inner strength, it's for you being a Muslim, not for others around being a Muslim. You don't need to be a Muslim for everybody else. It's enough if you are this for yourself. If I do this for my people, then the symbol will not mean it's necessary to show it outside to be a Muslim, but for myself. He does it as if we as a state do this. We are not the state, we are a leader of this minority, and we are saying this symbol is for you being a Muslim. It is not necessary that everybody around you recognize you as a Muslim to be a Muslim. As well as we think that the idea of killing yourself is not the leader we want to be. We don't want to encourage a religion where people start to kill themselves. We want to say this is a religion in a secular framework, especially in Western Europe. And where's the difference in between being gay and between being a Muslim or a Jew? Those are mostly the religions we talk about there. Being a Jew and being a Muslim means that you have a state code as well. There is a strong link between state rules and religious rules. This we can see in the state of Israel, and this we can see in lots of Arabic states that don't have the secular identity. Where where a large part of the majority thinks being gay doesn't necessarily conflict the general laws of our society. But where we think that the Sharia laws for women, for example, can actually conflict that. We believe this might be an idea for an internal struggle, but this is not a thing that you have to carry outside. This is where the clash points are. The main priorities for a Muslim are perceived from outside following Muslim rules and not state rules. This must not necessarily be true, but this is part of the idea how you are perceived. And this is where symbols come in. Where symbols come in, there is the idea that symbols are an oversimplification of the thing that you are carrying out. And therefore we believe that it is way more complex being a Muslim in Germany, being a Jew in Germany. Yeah, there are those conflicting things, but you can just explain them if you start talking with people. If people are just assuming that you are perceived as this is not enough. The third thing is the societal gates. Here saying we will vanish as a minority. We don't think that. We believe, firstly, we still have our inner strength if I, as a leader, say this is part of my identity. But secondly, the idea that you can get into institutions. There is still a bias against Muslims in Germany and France and in the UK as well. We believe if you display this a little bit less, you have the possibility to get into the institutions if you say that this is not necessary. We don't believe this is one of the main points, but it is one of the parts how you get into the structures and into the idea that you actually come into position to change more, that you actually come into the societies to change things. This is why Barack Obama, even though he was black, was not campaigning on being black mainly, because he thought, yeah, I can change things as a black for black people by showing how it actually works, but I have the possibility to say, yeah, I can do what everyone else can do, not because of my identity, but with my identity. There is a difference in between just a Jew who is in Germany and being a German Jew. Your question.
Look, you can't explain something that is hidden. If you develop the sense that your identity, the symbols of your identity, aren't appropriate.
I got your question, so thank you. The idea is that we believe a hidden symbol is something else than hiding your religion. A symbol is an oversimplification of the religion, whereas you need the complexity and the personal relationship to explain the complexity of a religion where the secular state conflicts with religious rules. And this is where we come in. So, the next point that I have is the idea of Eastern Europe. In Bosnia, we have 45% Muslims and 36% Orthodox. In Kosovo, we have 4% Orthodox. In Serbia, we have 3% Muslims. In Bulgaria, we have 20% Muslims. This is where unstable regions actually are. There it makes a difference to stability. Even in parts of France it makes a difference to stability. And there we are saying it's not just anymore about identity and carrying it out. We believe it's about the state and the security of your people as well. And the long-lasting peace between those religions. Therefore we need to get a step back. To say it is not just about me being Muslim. I have to accept you as a Muslim. I have to accept you as an Orthodox. How does this happen? Not by antagonizing each other with symbols, with oversimplifications of the other side, but by actually getting to know each other. This is way easier if you take away this barrier between you being a Muslim who is wearing a headscarf or publicly promoting your religion, or if you're an Orthodox who is publicly promoting that with symbols. We believe if we take away this barrier, then it's easier to start trade with each other, to acknowledge you again as my neighbor, to not just see you as your core identity of being this person, of being just a religion. You are more than a religion. And this is how you got defined in those countries. This is your main definition as a person. This is, you are a Muslim or you are an Orthodox. And this we should take away, because this is harmful for a process that can actually prevent hostilities of minorities against each other. We believe as well that at the end of the day we have a strong question to ask, and this is where we're closing opening half. We see that it might sometimes be harmful, and the first steps will be harmful sometimes for those people. We acknowledge partly that, but we believe as a religious leader we can explain this and can explain that those religious symbols are for yourself, that you yourself see you as a Muslim, that it is not necessary that everybody accept you being a Muslim, but to be a Muslim. We can explain this. And we believe that it is hard enough to have two different identities, being French and being Muslim. Sometimes it is good to separate them. If you can separate them, I know this is not intuitively the first thing that you might think, but the idea is when you can separate them, you can actually be a French person. You can participate as a French and having the secular moments without the symbol. And then you can be a Muslim and telling people what it means actually to be a Muslim in France or a French Muslim, and what the differences are between those two things. And this is where symbols are hindering. The separation of those two things are two parts of your identity, but it can help you to firstly be a French person and then showing that you are a Muslim to other people. This is the outside perception. The inside perception can still be that you're Muslim and a French and both at the same proportion. Thank you.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for his speech. Now to continue the case of the opposition, I'd like to invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition to address the House.
I'm going to give you two balances that are critical in this debate the way we see it. First of all is the long term, right? Is the process that first government is describing really that likely, or our process that we describe, right? The process of A, radicalization of the parts that are kind of extreme right now, and B, further segregation of the more moderates that we have right now is the more likely one. Secondly, we are going to talk about the how those leaders will be perceived, right? And why is that so matters so much? Before that, quite a bit about it. First of all, please notice, right, that we just heard that, well, you see, symbols, they can be interpreted. You don't have to wear them outside. You can make them only for yourself. First of all, that's not being a religious person, right? Being a religious person, by definition, absolutely not, by definition requires you to be public. Why? Because as they've told us to yourself, a crucial part of being a religious person is being in a community. A community is not a private thing. A community is a public thing, right? Since we're talking about multitudes of people, clearly that is a few things. So please notice the small issue of decorating your house on Christmas, right? That is being public, right? So by that as well, we have people who would like to decorate their house for their holidays. You're telling them, no, you cannot do that because it's a public display. No, guys, this is what they want to do. You can't live in a community where the community is comprised of people in their own houses, right? Secondly, please notice that he did not address the radicalization that Ariev brought you, and we're going to touch upon that later, right? Secondly, they told us that religion conflicts with our laws. A, maybe those laws should be changed. B, sometimes laws are made that harm the religion to begin with, like the burqa law of France, right? We think that it's not just the religion conflicts with the country picks up fights, right? Second, right? Thirdly, we think most of what religious people do not conflict in any way with our laws, specifically not public symbols, right? They do not conflict with laws on any way. And before someone brings up the fact that burqa is not mandatory at all times and stuff like that, to the people who wear it, it seems a crucial part of the religion, and that's all we care about, right? No, right? And then they told us about Eastern Europe and the fact of stability. So first of all, we think that defining this debate about the unstable regions that are unstable because of religion is a bit cheating. But the other side of that, right, we think that in those regions as well, they're still assuming that there will be acceptance on the long term. Will show that is not true, right? Lastly, they told us, you see, we will show that you can be a French and a Muslim later. Absolutely not, right? That is exactly what you're saying. You're saying you can be a Muslim at home, you can be a French outside, you can never be both. That is exactly what you're saying, right? And this is, please notice, this is the likely message for those people to receive for the very simple fact that that is what they see around them. They see that people treat them otherwise when they have those symbols and when they don't. This is the message that they receive. You're very, very enforcing that message, right? They told us, no, it's not about the state. Guys, we don't care if it's the state that does it or not. The fact that someone feels the need to hide his religion, to hide who he is when he goes outside is pernicious, no matter who is the person that tells him to do that, right? Going through the world with no mitigator is very, very hard. Knowing that you don't have your prayer beads that could be there to relax you when you feel bad. To know that you cannot wear your burqa or to protect you from strangers looking at you, right? Those are the things that those people use to mitigate the effects of the world on them. You are taking that away from them. It's a very hard way to go through the world, especially when this is everything you knew so far, right? That is exactly, and as like we told you, like a homosexual that is having a really hard time going through the world knowing he cannot be who he is on the public scene, right? That is pernicious, extremely pernicious. No. Okay, right? So, let's look at the long term as they show it, and let's see why is it unlikely. So, what do they say? They say, look, the Muslims today has bad reputation, therefore we need to coexist for a while, and then they can re-emerge and give their integrate in society when society is a bit less peace. Why do we not believe that is true? A, we believe that the Muslims that has bad reputations today are the most extremist kind. Those are the extremist kind that are going to be radicalized further on. When they are being radicalized further on, there is no coexistence for a while that you can actually give us and in order for the next step to fill in the place. But even if there were coexistence, and I'm going to show in a minute there is not, we don't accept the next step, right, of coming forth with demands after a while of coexistence, right? Because now it seems weird, right? If it's so important to you to wear your burqa, why didn't you do it up until now, right? That, please notice, if the state would have done it, maybe we would understand why they would do it under. No, why would they do it up until now? But because the religious leaders did it, now it seems very weird. Who are you to come with demands to stuff that you really just invented that you care about? However, when those people has those symbols to begin with, people understand their significance, therefore allowing them to have it first.
Religious leaders interpret the Holy Scriptures. Therefore, they have an authority over that. Yeah, you need convincing. Yeah, it's not easy, but this doesn't mean you shouldn't do it if it's the right thing to do.
We'll get to the leaders in a second. But the point is, as we're telling you, right, that you can't come with claims after people couldn't see how important to you, right? People can see how Shabbat is important to Jews because they see that they can't drive and they can't turn the light and they can't do a lot of very certain things on Shabbat. That is how people understand it's so important to them. Under your mechanism, no one can understand how important it is, therefore they cannot integrate. But why is it unlikely what they said, right? Because we believe those religious leaders, as we said, there will be further radicalization, right? Why? Because they would be seen as collaborators. A, there is a sudden change of heart. No one of them said it so far. B, it's actually against the religion, right? Part of my religion is to wear a burqa, as we've just told you, right? So what happens? A, I'm not likely, so the more extremist part, those who are just saying those are collaborators, let's not listen to them, let's talk with the ones who talk with us about pride, i.e. the more extremists. So there is further radicalization which does not give us the coexistence that the whole government is premised upon. Therefore, we beg you to oppose.
For speaking now to open the second half of the debate, I'd like to invite the member of government to take the floor. Go ahead.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, Even in the liberal Europe, the raging Islamophobia is the only and the main reason why we cannot accept new people, especially Muslims, coming from these areas. We think that this is what we're going to bring to you from the closing government. We think that's the reason why we actually cannot integrate these people at the moment, and we think that symbols which we could lose by this policy are the things that could help us integrate these people and change the narrative that people today have in their heads. I'm going to speak about that mainly in 4 sub-points, which I'm going to introduce later under that logic. Before that, I have rebuttal points to the opening opposition. Sorry. So about that great POI about gay people, you see, we're going to say the same thing that the opening already spoke about. We think that we're a secular place, an equal place which provides equal rights to everyone. We think that that's why, you should, it's okay to accept people and all those things. Secondly, we think that you don't have radicals that much in our society that oppose gays in the end. People don't really know them, and people don't really care about them. No, thank you. And we think that that's why it's much more easier, to actually go to these people and make these people change that. We think that when you compare that to, for example, Muslims, then most people associate them with terrorism, which is much more dangerous to you, much more intruding into your personal space, which means that you're much more angrier and much less accepting to these ideas. That's why gays are not analogous. Secondly, they speak about how you hide your identity, and hence you cannot explain something that is hidden. Now, we think that overall, yes, in an ideal society, we would all be exactly what we want, but we think that we need to make concessions in order to exist. Now, we think that, firstly, that premise is not true. It's not true that I cannot be a religious person privately. I think very many people in very many states in Europe and everywhere in the world choose to be privately religious. It's one of the most private things people think about themselves that conform their identity. Now, secondly, we think that the overall acceptance which would come along over time, we think compensates the fact that you at the moment cannot be openly religious because you feel that you're not heard and you cannot be explained. Well, ladies and gentlemen, at the moment they are hidden in a sense that people don't listen to them and are seen as intruders and foreigners. That's the barrier that we need to lose in order for them to be members of the society. Then they speak about how radicals can manipulate people. Now, we think that you still have a certain alternative to it, I'm not going to wear anything, and B, I'm going to Islamic State. We think that you do wear stuff if you want to still exist in that society. B, we think that if you're that radical that you're open to going to Islamic State, you probably would go simply because, France is arming people, or, we have airstrikes and stuff like that. You find some other thing and you're already gone. Now, then they speak about how you cannot use that these are the symbols that you mitigate to yourself, that you are okay and all of those things. We think that a lot of people actually are being moderate today, and we see that a lot of people can exist without showing their symbols all the time. Furthermore, we think that religion can change, something I'm going to touch upon later. In an environment of Europe, not showing your symbols is not an intrinsic part of a religion. And then they speak about religious leaders. It's a funny thing, I was writing my answer at the same time that the opening asked the POI. We think that religious leaders are seen as an authority who interpret the holy things. No, thank you. They can actually influence these people quite a lot. That's the whole idea why people conform next to them, so that they would guide them and all of those other things. Thus, we believe that they do have authority and that you can do that. Closing.
It is not then likely that when this authority figure suggests that you denounce your symbols and your religion, i.e. your identity, you will actually distance yourself from them.
Okay, we think that that's not true, because we think that a lot of people actually are in congregations at the moment and do not wear symbols, for example. Furthermore, we think that the fact that you can still be religious in your congregation is what motivates you. The whole rhetoric about being a member of the community is about being religious. You still have a community to be religious in, and you're still going to be religious. You just don't have to be symbolic outside. We think that it's a concession that is okay thing to do. My material. So speaking about why we think that the associations that people have in Europe at the moment are the reason why we cannot integrate people. No, so what we think that people want is what the opening started with. They want to be accepted, they want social relevance, they need a voice in the discussion board. What is happening is the status quo at the moment. You see, there is an anger from the majority who feel that people are intruders, who demand more rights, and who sometimes get them simply because they're a large minority, and they don't see that that's okay. The fact that they don't see why that's okay is that they associate those people with a very strict stereotype. A stereotype of being, for example, Muslim, which Muslim derives most people in Europe as being terrorists because they don't have real, like, being together, or they don't have experiences on their own. We think that symbols especially seem more radical, because even if you see a moderate Muslim, then that perhaps is not that worse. But if you see, like, the symbols that IS uses to torture people, that do all the wrong things and bad things in places which we associate terrorism with, those symbols, like, are here as well, and when you see them, then you associate them, and the stereotype is perpetuated. Furthermore, we think that if we have moderate people walking around in the streets, then if you have moderate people walking around the streets, and I meet a moderate person and see that, oh yeah, you can do it without being radical, then what I do is I perceive congregations as being more radical because they cannot somehow do it without being the whole terrorist narrative perpetuated way, which we believe that it's also bad for congregations, and that's another reason why leaders should do it. But furthermore, we think that the reason why there are no alternatives is the fact that, why we cannot change our perception in Europe is the fact that the narrative is constantly being perpetuated. We constantly see insurgencies in Middle East which constantly perpetuate the narrative that terrorists are Muslims and we need to go and save the innocent people who are there from these really radical people. And that happens all the time, and we cannot do anything about that. What we need to do is change like the people here to conform to the narrative that people have. And in the end, in the long run, change people's minds by having them listen to us. What's the justification behind that? We think that overall we think that a minority does need to conform to a majority simply because they cannot change that. And to some extent we believe that that's okay. And the majority supports secularism and supports the idea that we all need to live in this state together. That's why, Christian people are also privately Christian to some extent. And we think that the reason why we think that people can actually do that is the narrative that we do think that religion can change. We think that we've seen when we look at Christianity, for example, the reason why Islam is not changing that fast is it's in an environment that is not changing and not developing. We think that if you take Islam to some extent and put it in a very well-developed environment, then you can see that people are more moderate here. You do have development which incentivizes, for example, women to demand more rights, etc., etc. Hence, we believe that you actually can be a moderate Muslim, and that's completely fine. And we think that in the long run, you gain voice and you gain experiences with people to change the awful narrative that most people have. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for his speech, and now I invite the member of opposition to address the House. Yeah.
Sorry, whenever. Mr. Speaker, we believe that the first opposition has done a very good job of explaining to why this particular model will hurt the identities of these religious minority members and further radicalize those that are already into an extreme, right? What we're going to bring to as part of our extension primarily is why we believe that we harm by their model the creation of a pluralistic religious identity in these particular states, and how that will further alienate even the moderates within these particular societies, both from their religious leaders as well as from society as a whole, and that is obviously bad, and we don't want that. Right? In order to do that, I'm going to tackle a few premises from the OG and then give you 4 other points of rebuttal. I'm afterwards going to be talking about a majority narrative shaped by the silence of the minority. And secondly, I'm going to be talking about distancing from the leaders and the harms that will bring. And lastly, I'll be talking about the message that this particular request from the leaders brings forward. Right? So let's take a deep dive into the premises that we've heard from the government bench fundamentally. Right? I think you need to differentiate between the fact that we have a secular state and a secular community, fundamentally, right? And think of the case of the U.S., because the U.S. as a government is secular, but the community pretty much identifies itself as being quite rednecky, religious, especially in the South, right? And this is going to be relevant in my substantive. Secondly, I think you need to differentiate, you need to understand one thing, right? They're talking about the need to maintain secularism and by not showing the identity of minority religions, but it is okay for the majority religion to have its symbols way out there, and that does not encroach on secularism for some reason, and we don't understand why that is so. But even more importantly, you need to differentiate between displaying your minority religion symbols and proselytization, which potentially might encroach on that particular secularism, and that is not something that is proven from this side of the house, right? Second, the first point of rebuttal I wanted to bring forward is this assumption that fundamentally what you want to do is enhance cooperation and interactions, and fundamentally at somewhere down the line you will find out that that person is Muslim and break down all barriers, right? Because that is what their whole model and mechanism relies on. First of all, that depends massively on direct interactions, which a lot of times don't necessarily happen between these minorities. And even if it do have interactions, it needs to be an interaction that actually will lead to the conversation of, oh, you're Muslim? Oh my God, I never thought that. Again, very unlikely. What we believe will be far more likely to happen for the majority of cases is the shaping of that majority narrative that most of us are Christians because we don't see symbols of any other minority religions there, and this is going to be relevant in my substantive. The other point that we hear from side government is the idea that symbols earn value, and that value will decrease once religious leaders ask for them to be brought down, right? They're ignoring the fact that most of these symbols are an integral part of that particular religion, right? Maybe the burqa, or maybe the Bible, or maybe the cross. But even more importantly, they are ignoring the fact that these symbols gain value through other sources other than local religious leaders, right? Like the Holy Book, if they have one. Like the rest of their community who has the same religion. Or global religious leaders who won't necessarily buy into the same narrative of renounce those particular symbols, right? So that value does stay there, and you do have the harms of giving those away. This idea of getting into institutions by hiding your minority religious identity, if they choose to do so as an individual because they feel they can do that within the status quo. Most of them don't. Why? Because it encroaches on their own identity and their self-worth, and that is why they've actively chosen not to do that. The last point, this idea that religion by definition is private and it is okay to maintain your identity as such. Well, identity by definition is also how other people perceive you. So ideally you want to manifest that one and have it reflected in the general society as a whole. Extension. The moment you have, yes, I'm flagging it. The moment you have a narrative that is not shaped by the constant influence of seeing minority religious symbols everywhere else in your society, you build up this impression that you are the only religion that exists. You might believe that you're in a secular state, but you think you're Christian. And not being flooded with information that there are other minorities out there will sometimes shape the impression that it is only Christians living in this particular type of a society. And that is problematic on two main points. Because any other religion fundamentally becomes not something that is an integral part of our society and here and next to me and proximate, but rather an other. And that narrative of the other is the one that leads to extreme views on two main reasons. A, you are no longer exposed to the opportunity to break stereotypes, right? They talk about a negative reinforcement constantly in the Middle East. Well, goddammit, I want them to see normalized Muslims living in our society as productive and useful members of society who don't walk around with a bomb strapped to their vest. And that is when you break these particular stereotypes. By making these people hide their identity of Muslims, you never get to that particular type of normalization that happens instantly. Don't you agree, ma'am?
What you described is already the status quo in Western state. On top of that, we have the refusal to accept these people and talk to them because you only see the superficial symbol that you're afraid of. You need to first accept them as people so that you accept when they talk about their religion.
Got it, thank you. In a world where I have to pick between some people being retarded enough not to accept Muslims for what they are and denying them and pushing them away instantly, or in a world where I have to reinforce the constant negative reinforcement that they're talking about and perceiving Muslims strictly based on events in the Middle East or other stuff that I see on the media, I will choose mine. And here is why, because this is the second reason why we believe we need a dual narrative within our society, right? Fundamentally, it is a matter of social identification, right? Whenever you are part of a group, human tendency by nature is to identify the characteristics of your group as being desirable and the characteristics of members of other groups as being less desirable. So it is a matter of self-worth, and that is how we identify ourselves generally. That means that if my impression is that everyone within our society is Christian, I'm not exposed to the contrary view, that means that the Christian values are the ones who are deemed as being desirable, and by definition anything else far less so, right? Fundamentally, that means that what you achieve is this idea that you are not a multi-pluralistic society and religion where people can coexist happily, but rather that it is only by the virtue of the fact that we're all Christians that we can coexist well, right? We want to build a narrative where we can coexist in a secular state, which is what they want, but by manifesting various religions, and that is the narrative that we need to shape in people's mind. But even more importantly, they talk about the debates that happen within our society. We believe that those debates, even when antagonistic, are still adding value to the fact that you give voices to all of these people into our societies, as opposed to simply denying their existence and letting the narrative of the other being built up within our societies, and we believe that that is important to maintain in your mind. Lastly, you need to remember the fact that these are leaders who are all of a sudden asking you to denounce your identity, right? Fundamentally, we believe that that is problematic because you tend to distance yourself from them, right? And these religious leaders, by the virtue of the fact that most of them will have been in these communities by the time you get there, as a Turk in Germany, for example, means that you're losing out on a liaison with the rest of the community, right? That means that you have far less opportunity to actually integrate, and that is damaging for the future of these particular ones. But even more importantly is the narrative of the actual leader, right? Because that particular leader tells you all of a sudden, you need to hide your identity because the rest of the people will push you away. That means that by definition, the rest of society rejects your own identity, meaning that there's no chance in hell you will want to integrate, but rather maintain yourself in that isolated stance, never actually integrate in your society. You need to oppose this proposal.
Now to close the debate for the government side, I'd like to invite the government whip to take the floor. Go ahead.
Ladies and gentlemen, the problem isn't that we only think there is one religion. The problem we want to tackle on the proposition side is that we currently think there is only one right religion. And that is a detrimental underlying concept that currently is carried throughout Europe, and that is why our model tackles Islamophobia, making these leaders, congregation members, and our general society better off. I will summarize this debate in two questions. Firstly, what will be the effect on a congregation member? Secondly, what will be the effect on a general society? Before that, I would like to give 4 points of rebuttal to the previous speaker, right? Firstly, they said that we need to acknowledge that on a societal level we're strongly religious. Because we're talking about the United States that is strongly religious, we say we're talking about Europe, right? Their own analysis on why everybody identifies as Christians in the south of the United States has nothing to do with European congregations advocating for what they should think they should do. Secondly, the main line of analysis that they gave was that we need interaction between people because otherwise most will think that only Christians exist in our society and therefore Christianity becomes the desirable value. Shocker, this is already what's happening, right? Currently people are thinking that most of people are Christian, but the problem is they are thinking that anything else besides Christianity is wrong if they opt into the religious framework because everything else is radical, everything else is dangerous to our society because it's associated with terrorism. Something that Kristin elaborately explained and was never answered by the closing opposition, right? Lastly, they said that symbols come from books, right? And this message will contradict the teachings and values of congregation members, which is also not true because the books are usually interpreted by the religious leaders that we say should advocate our policy, right? It's not that you go to your religious institution and sit there quietly reading a book every time, but it's rather you actually communicate and discuss and hear your leaders' speeches and interpretations of that book, right? I will substantiate in that under the first clash point, which I will come to now. Effects on congregation members, right? We say religion is defined by the leaders, the values and practices. This can be exemplified through the actual progression of religions that has happened throughout the history, right? Bahrain, Qatar are becoming more and more progressive, granting women more rights in their societies. Religions change constantly, right? We have had a positive trend. Usually these religions change because the religious community leaders or advocate different interpretations of what the scripture has said. Because let's be honest, like scriptures are vague, right? Regardless of any religion. So it's usually exactly as they said, the community and the community leader who determines what the concrete interpretation should be. The opposition line was, this is insulting, right? But they never explained why the insulting effect on an individual isn't tied to interpretation. It's only insulting if it falls upon an individual. But if that individual's self-perception and religious identity is tied to the community which they concede to, then if the community and the leader of the community advocates for that understanding that the religion can be internalized, then that person will not feel insulted to the same extent, right? Secondly, they said, but this will radicalize people, right? We are saying two things. Firstly, we think that if we really talk about people who will become radical because of this small notch, we say they are already susceptible to radicalization anyway. Secondly, we think that large majority aren't susceptible to IS recruiters because every religious leader, a moderate Muslim leader around the world already condemns them. That includes the leaders of the congregations we're talking about. So unless they manage to prove that why now IS recruiters would have more religious and moral authority to sit down over the congregation leaders who they have admired their entire life, they have no case there, right? We say that people need to define themselves. They need to possess religion, but define themselves through individuals in order for that to become normal. They say that religion needs to be public because it's a community thing, and unless it's public, it bears no value. That is fallacious, right? We say the public display of anything, it only bears value if it's accepted and not welcomed with aggression, right? Which is the problem we're trying to solve, and which alternative of solvency they have never. We say if we have less emphasis on if we actually integrate moderates moderate Muslims, for instance, who have taken to the idea that we shouldn't wear burqas in public, right? They can integrate them into these congregations and stop emphasizing the congregations currently who still uphold religious public display of religion. They won't be seen as radical because they're actually integrating the more moderate and progressive part of the Muslim population that we have in European states to their congregation. This adds to the voice, this adds to the image that you can be a Muslim and you can be actually part of our value framework and a progressive religion, right? But before that, sure.
You're right, there are many shades of religion. When my imam tells me that I need to hide my identity, then right down the road there's another one who interprets the script in a way that feels righter, the way Muslims around the world
Right. But like you're misconstruing the concept. It's not like people are going to walk up to the congregation and say, hey, be ashamed of your identity, right? This is going to be in a way that is acceptable for people, and an explanation will probably follow. If you're talking about a bad parent, but we are talking about rational, reasonable congregation members who can actually package this in a way that is reasonable, like it has happened before. Basically, the second question, which is underlying and which has never been responded by the upbench, how do we change the perception of society? We say the first problem Christian brought out was the idea that constant display of religious symbols makes false associations, right? Language and symbols are what we use to construct our social reality. If we think about the burqa, or like other religious symbols, the main way we come in contact with those symbols is through the media. In what context? Especially IS, Al-Qaeda, and all the other things. Why is that the case? The case is that radical terrorist organizations use the fundamental underlying religious symbols as a tool to actually impose what they think. Like, if we think about IS, they're imposing strict Islam on women in Iraq, right? That is basically making them full body veils and so on and so forth. What that does is in the head of a European that automatically associates religious headgear with the policy of the IS, the terrorism, the radicalization, and all that negative stuff, right? We say we need to abolish that. They say that you can't, this kind of puts idea in my head that I can't be a Frenchman and a Muslim. That is the issue now, right? Because Muslims are not accepted in these societies. What we say is that firstly you need to show that you're willing to become a Frenchman in order for you to be accepted as a Muslim in that society. If we show willingness to cooperate, as the first proposition said, right? People will accept you as an individual and then become to know you as a Muslim. What we add to that is two positive effects on a long-term change. Firstly, if you're actually getting to know more Muslims because you're no longer pushed back by the fact that they wear religious headgear, you will not generalize about Muslims to that extent, right? You're more likely to believe that they are individuals. Secondly, meaning that you're more likely to see the grievances that Muslims legitimately have as more probable and something you should consider to a larger extent. Because if your friend who happens to be a Muslim and tells you that what we have done in the Middle East is awful, you're more likely to listen. What this means is that you create more general acceptance and an actual understanding and nuanced perception of the Muslim community, making them more welcome, having less integrational tensions, and bettering their lives and ability to practice their religion in public in the future.
Thank the government for a speech. Now to close the semi-final as a whole, I'd like to invite the opposition whip to address the House. Here we go.
Mr. Speaker, in this debate, at the end of it, you are forced to make a choice between two portrayals. The first portrayal is the portrayal of a pluralist viewer competing with long-term view of coexistence, the portrayal that we chose to fight for. On the other side, on the side government, you are forced to analyze a portrayal of a monolithic view reinforced only negatively by media extreme examples. The problem that we want to tackle, what we want to do and solve this problem, is to normalize how symbols are viewed in our society, because under in their world, you only allow the extreme portrayal of these symbols by shutting down the normal portrayal of symbols. You need to let symbols being associated with more normal people and not allowing media to only get to people by showing them only extreme examples such as all Muslims are terrorists. This is the normalization that we have to do. Secondly, the only way that you can acknowledge the existence of plural religion is by seeing people associated with that religion. By making them not display their religion, you cannot acknowledge that those people who are regular people that live regular lives and are not seen as terrorists are of that religion. They will just be lost in the crowd, which is, guess what? The crowd of the majority. We believe that it's extremely important to change the paradigm that exists in our societies, which is a paradigm where we have a majority religion, or the French religion, and we want to change that to a pluralistic view where the freedom of religion is more important than nationality. I'm going to explain that also why that is important, and that it is not important to be feeling that you are part of the crowd of a nationality, but to be able to understand and to tolerate other religions too, and change this perspective into a pluralistic society. Okay, I'm going to talk about two things in my speech, about why we need public displays of symbols and faith, and why this is essential for these minorities, and secondly, how you decredibilize leaders of these congregations, and how that is hugely problematic. Before that, just one minor comment. We believe that the first government talked about how you infringe upon secularism. We haven't seen at any point why secularism should be seen as the absolute value that we're fighting for. B, we'd rather stand for a plurality of religions, which is not mutually exclusive with secularism. And C, secularism does not reflect always the view of the communities these people live in. And we explained how that's happening in the United States of America, where small communities appropriate a certain religion, which makes them discriminate for the minorities that exist, although the United States is proclaimed as a secular state. So we believe that it is important to understand these 2 points to get our problem, our perspective of narratives. Okay, so first point, why we need public display of symbols and faith. First of all, because it creates awareness, because in their world what happens is that everything should happen at home or behind closed doors. This only reinforces the general narrative of majority religion. How is that? Firstly, by shutting down any display of the existence of these minorities. B, any voice that shouts, "We are still here," which actually creates a platform for discussion. We need awareness. We believe awareness is important because A, it creates empathy for these people. B, it breaks stereotypes because you can see that they are normal people who are of other religion, but they're just like us. It's easier to engage with them if you see that they are regular people just like you. And C, extremely important, it forces discussion and debate. It is exactly that narrative that they want to avoid, the conflicting views in the society, that makes people buy into the idea of plurality of perspectives and plurality of religion in that society. Shutting down the minorities and display of their religion only goes and perpetuates that idea that the majorities, the majoritarian, no thank you, religion is the one that matters and that should abuse of other, should go above other minorities. No thank you. B, why it's also important to have these symbols and the displays of faith and so on and so forth. Because it empowers minorities by offering them a feeling of A, identity, and B, a place in the society. We've heard from opening opposition how they basically feel inferior if you don't do that. What we showed you is that you make them less willing to make efforts to integrate because of feeling of antagonization, because you perpetuate this idea that the majority does not want you there and is not willing to engage in a discussion with you. The problem now with their scenario is that you are forced to adhere as a minority, or you receive this message, to a society that is not willing to accept who you are as a person. We believe that for these people, religion and faith are priority to nationality because religion and faith are something concrete, they are something that proximate to them, something that they care about too much because those are offering them a community, not friends in general, but the Muslim community that offers them home, friends, advice, and is there whenever they need it. That's why we need to preserve this feeling of appertenance, of belonging to a community. That's why we believe that it's problematic. No, thank you. My blog is problematic too. Second point, how you decredibilize leaders of these congregations and how that is hugely problematic. A, you do that in front of their people. Okay, first.
Okay, so we told you symbols are a simplifying barrier. What is more likely to change your behavior towards a religion?
No,
a more likely Jewish friend or without a symbol, or seeing 10 Jews with a kippah?
They are not simplifying barriers. You will only see the symbols that are portrayed by media, which means that Muslims are all terrorists. That's the problem. You take away all other cases in which you can interact with people that are Muslims and see that they are normal. That's the problem. That destroys your case. How you decredibilize it in front of their people? Because people will feel betrayed because of the importance of the religion for them and of these leaders. We believe that PT of public faith is essential for identity, for instance, hijab. Yes, there might be some people who are okay not to display religion in public, but those are not those that we target with this more, so we don't believe that that is relevant. B, in front of the whole society, because it sends a message to the whole society that their rights are irrelevant. Why? Because not even their own leaders don't fight for them, which decredibilizes the position that leaders have in the society and the whole movement which fights for them in the society a lot. The problem is that you need these leaders to push for people's rights, to be the connection between their community and the others, and there's no one else to do that. And what will happen? A, we will alienate these congregations even more by perpetuating the idea that they are minorities and they are a danger, alienate them by making them feel even less worthy religious-wise. C, makes the society accept them even less by reinforcing the narrative that we are the majority and have the right to subdue them because of the right, we have the right religion. Because we fight for a pluralistic religious state, please oppose.